Hello and welcome to Tête-à-Tête, France 24's flagship interview show. Our guest today is the head of the Tibetan government in exile, Pampa Tsering. Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you for having me. There's too little focus on nonviolence, and thank you for having.
Well, that's a nice way to start. When it comes to China, in the region, in Washington, in other European capitals, people focus on China's military expansionism, on Taiwan, on Hong Kong, on the Uyghurs in Xinjiang, much less than before on Tibet. Is this a concern for you? And what is happening inside Tibet?
There not being coverage and no interest does not mean to say that nothing is happening in Tibet. I always say we are dying a slow death, because when the whole world is moving towards multiculturalism, China is the only country that's moving towards uniculturalism. So present policies and programs of the Chinese government are all aimed towards eradication of the identity of the Tibetan people, whether it be language or religion, apart from not there being any political space whatsoever. So George Orwell's 1984 is coming into reality in the whole of China and more so in Tibet.
Right. The problem is that in the eyes of many in the international community, they have forgotten about Tibet. It's not only dying slowly, it's dying in silence.
That's true, because there is 157 Tibetans have self-immolated from 2009 till about last year. And there was a time in 1963 when one Vietnamese monk burned himself to death, and it became international news. So that is because Chinese government knows that the world needs evidence, and they don't allow access of journalists or diplomats to visit Tibet, leave alone ordinary tourists. So the situation continues to be very grave for the Tibetans.
Right. This was highlighted in a report by UN experts in February, warning that nearly 1 million Tibetan children have been separated from their families and forcibly sent to government-run boarding schools. This has been obviously denied by the Chinese government, but this is part of a broader policy. Can you tell us exactly what is happening with those children?
It's about 1 million children between the age of 6 to 18 who are in colonial-style boarding schools, where they are kept away from their family, away from their culture, away from their language, and away from their way of life. And they are taught only in Chinese language, and they are taught how to plead their loyalty to the Communist Party. So there are, again, children between the age of 3 to 6, about 150,000 children are also in boarding schools. So if this continues for another 2-3 decades, this is going to be very detrimental for the Tibetans. And when you point that out to the Chinese government, they point fingers at the United States and say how they treated their native people, or the Canadians with the First Nations, even with Scandinavians, with the Sami people, leave alone Australia with the Aboriginals and Maoris in New Zealand. So China knows that what these countries have done. These countries know that they did a mistake and they're trying to make up for it. But China is deliberately, knowingly doing it to the Tibetans. It's not only the Tibetans, but it's also for the Uyghurs and also...
I was going to say, this reminds us of the reports about those re-education camps that were set up in Xinjiang. Is this something new that is happening under Xi Jinping's presidency or leadership, because it's been a decade now? Is this something that's different from his predecessors?
So it got intensified, much more intensified during Xi Jinping's time. President Xi Jinping is responsible for introducing the security law in Hong Kong, the concentration camps in Uyghur, the colonial-style boarding schools in Tibet, and this is very reflective of where China is trying to move. That's why I said when the whole world is moving towards multiculturalism, China is moving towards uniculturalism at the expense of cultures of all other nationalities in China.
Right. Some people thought that when Xi Jinping rose to power, we know he had family ties to Tibet, even to the Dalai Lama, and they thought, oh, maybe he will improve our situation. 10 years later, what's your assessment of Xi Jinping on Tibet?
So we were wrong. Many people thought that his wife is Buddhist and his mother was also oriented towards Buddhist, and his father had relations with His Holiness the Dalai Lama and also the Panchen Lama. But unfortunately, even he himself suffered under Mao Zedong. His father suffered under Mao Zedong. But right now, he's following the steps of Mao Zedong.
Right. In late August, the U.S. State Department announced that there would be visa restrictions on the Chinese officials involved in this policy that we described with the schools. Are you calling for further sanctions? And what about other countries? It seems that when it comes to slapping sanctions on China, they're looking the other way.
Sanctions is just one means of letting Chinese government know that you are not doing the right thing. But I think the more important thing is to push China towards the negotiation table, because we tell countries that if you keep repeating the statement that Tibet is part of PRC, you're going against international law, because we have only one agreement with China, 17-point agreement. Now the countries also keep repeating this statement that Tibet is part of PRC, and on the other hand, they also say we support negotiation. These two doesn't go together.
They're afraid of China?
Then also the reason, why is China asking other countries to say Tibet is part of PRC if it had already been part of China? And the Chinese government knows that they have no legitimacy of their rule in Tibet. That is why they are trying to seek that legitimacy from the international community.
Right, but why are those countries obeying China, if I may, and not telling China, well, this is not right?
Unfortunately, most of the governments, most of the politicians think only short-term for their economic benefit. They don't realize that they have to stand up for the values that they enjoy in the democratic countries.
Do you feel betrayed?
Of course we feel betrayed, but then that is why I keep saying that every leader should understand the oneness of humanity and the interdependent nature of our existence in this world. So if you enjoy freedom here, tomorrow if it knocks on your door, just like Russia invaded Ukraine and Europe is just waking up to the reality. So we go around the world, tell the leaders what are the real intentions and motivations of the Chinese government. So on that basis, you have to take some strategic decisions as to how you deal with China.
You are committed, as well as your spiritual leader, the Dalai Lama, to the so-called middle way policy, which is granting Tibet autonomy and not independence. However, as far as I understand, there are no official talks with Beijing over this issue. So it seems it's a dead end.
So His Holiness always appreciated the common interests of humanity. He also appreciates the concept of European Union. If it had not been for the European Union, the Europeans would still be fighting each other. If that can be applied to Europe, then why not Tibet with China? We look at the larger picture, give a holistic understanding of the situation. That is why His Holiness came out with this middle way, avoiding extreme polarities. So China has not responded in the manner they should have responded. That is why I say the Chinese leaders lack common sense, because we have addressed their main concern, sovereignty, and we are willing to live with them. Even if we want, we cannot lift Tibet out of that place and put it somewhere near France in the Atlantic or the Pacific, So we have to learn to live in peace. But Chinese have not responded well. But we do have back channels, but nothing concrete to talk about.
Right, but back channels can lead to open channels. But it seems, given Xi Jinping's posture vis-à-vis Tibet, this is not going to happen under his rule.
Yeah, that is why we are also being very careful. We are taking only one step at a time. And right now, under President Xi Jinping, it looks very unlikely that there will be positive results. But then we can't be thinking only short term. We have to think long term.
Right, but there are some members, maybe youth groups and members of the so-called Tibetan parliament in exile. They're saying this middle way is leading nowhere. We want independence. Do you hear those calls, and do you fear that some of those might decide waiting China out is not the good strategy, let's do something else?
Definitely not violence. Even those who propose independence don't propose violence. So the only way that you can resolve the Sino-Tibet conflict is through dialogue. There is no other way. Whether you are seeking independence, which is the historical right of the Tibetans, or whether we are seeking independence, which is more reasonable approach
Autonomy,
based on the autonomy, which is a more pragmatic approach, considering the reality of the situation where the Tibetans will have the freedom to use its language, practice its religion, preserve its way of life, and Tibet's environment, which is very, very important, not only for Tibet, but for the whole region.
Last issue, obviously, the succession of the Dalai Lama is also a bone of contention with Beijing. They would like, obviously, to appoint his successor. He has said many things about his succession, including that this could be announced when he turns 90, which is in 2025. How do you view this succession? Because it could also mean a lot for Tibet's future.
So it's only 1.5 years down the line, so we will have to wait for His Holiness to come out with a statement about his decision, about his reincarnation. But one thing that China cannot handle is unpredictableness. And China being a communist state who does not believe in religion, so His Holiness has a very wise response to this, saying that if Chinese leaders are really serious about reincarnation, then they should study Tibetan Buddhism first, because this practice is very unique to Tibetan Buddhism. And then they should look for Mao Zedong's reincarnation or Deng Xiaoping's reincarnation. Now Jiang Zemin is also no more. So if they are really serious, they should look for Chinese leaders' reincarnation, then maybe the Dalai Lamas. So I tell the Chinese government, do you need a problem that is going to be lifelong? Because if there are 2 Dalai Lamas in future, this is going to be lifelong, and President Xi Jinping won't be alive by that time. So His Holiness keeps reminding us that he will live for another 2 decades and more, and he will live up to 113 years of age, because there are propitious pre-signs that this Dalai Lama will live very long. So I tell the communist Chinese friends, I don't call them enemies also, then let us see whether the Dalai Lama outlives the Communist Party or the Communist Party outlives the Dalai Lama.
Phanpat Tsering, I want to thank you very much for coming on the Friends 24 set.
Thank you very much.
And I want to thank you all for watching this edition. Stay tuned for more news here on Friends 24.